here. The lights not right. 1458.
Thank you.
1458. Yeah. Sometime after that. Nobody knows quite
So,
when she passed away.
John,
Yeah. So yes.
this time period that Hildegard and Julian of Norwich in particular, they lived through the Black Death
The Black Death. Yes.
period, and my understanding is that especially Julian was very affected by that. She was a child during that Black Death.
That's
and
right.
very affected by it. And all
Yeah.
the political upheaval in the church, the political, but as well as the church upheaval during that period of time, the revolt in England, and the schism in the church, and all those things were going on
Yeah.
during the time of Julian. And I always kind of wondered about how the effect on her and her behavior, or any of them,
Yes.
because of that.
Yeah, right. Thank you for bringing that up. I skipped by it and shouldn't have. Yeah, and in fact, she was very ill as a young girl. She was only 3, and it coincided with the Black Death.
Right.
Now, it hasn't been confirmed that that was a Black Death, the plague that she suffered from, but she survived. However, while she was desperately ill and in her bed, her deathbed, she thought she had vision of Jesus, and so that was the source of her vision that triggered her mysticism for the rest of her life. And which brings up a very important point, and that is that all of them, Hildegard had those terrible migraine headaches, apparently, and then here's the Black Death, and as you mentioned, simultaneously was the upheaval in England. The Lollards were causing big political upheavals and problems in England at this time too. So it was a tough time that people were living in. So thank you very much for bringing that up, and we return to that. There are other times too when they were particularly tough, though I think the Middle Ages were about as tough as anything I'd want to live through. And and that seems to be consistently a trigger to have near-death experiences, dire illnesses, accidents, so on, that really threaten the life of the individual, and that individual becomes a mystic as a result of that. That is very common. In the first class, when I asked what your thoughts were on what the qualities are of the mystics, I thought maybe it would be mentioned. Oh well, they all have severe experiences that they live through miraculously, and nobody mentioned that. But now is a good time to mention it. It is quite common, not quite everybody, but it is quite common. So in that is, of course, the existential element. Or that individual realizes what the edge of existence is, and is miraculously, in their feeling and understanding of it, miraculously and mysteriously preserved, therefore devoted to contributing to whatever God's desire is of us. And to Hildegard, that is to contribute to the living cosmology. I mean, we've been through that already. So, yeah, and then of course Julian graduated. It was later in her life, after her visions, but nonetheless, to enter into that cell and be sealed in there for 16 years is quite remarkable. Okay, one more that is in this period, but I was going to talk about right now. She's a favorite of ours, of course, and that is St. Clare of Assisi. And she is from that same general period, too. St. Clare was not, well, let's see, not quite overlapping with Hildegard, but shortly after her. That is 1194 to 1253. We'll be coming back to that. But here is a wall mural that, as I understand, I haven't seen it, is in the chapel of Assisi. Is that true? Let's see, Wendy, who else has been there? Did you see this by any chance, or has anyone seen this particular mural
I
there?
have not been there.
Oh, you haven't?
No,
Okay, I thought you had been. Okay, somebody went with Robbie there. Oh,
Sue
it was Sue. That's right.
Alexander. Yeah.
Yeah, Sue Alexander went there. All right, I guess none of us has had the good fortune of being there. Harvey, you haven't got there, or anybody?
Oh,
All right.
I never have.
Okay. Anyway, so this is a mural. And here, of course, in the lead is St. Clare. She was, her ordination was Benedictine, but she became Franciscan. Guess why? It was because a slightly older, a somewhat older mentor that she much admired was St. Francis. And their, of course, as we know, their profound realizations, inner realizations, and their mystical practices had to do with, profoundly have to do with the sustenance of life, again here, animals, plants, and so forth. And that's what we love them, well, very much for. And here is St. Clare. What she did for her task in life was to gather women in the work of the order, which she headed. She was the head of the order. And these are the poor women of Damiano, which was the community and the town in that area, or close by that area in Italy, Damiano. And these poor women of Damiano, led by St. Clare, did good works in the community, counseling, particularly to the grieving and to the suffering, and bringing what all they could, which wasn't much. They're the poor women, but their counsel and their support and so forth for the grieving and the suffering was inestimable in its worth and in its life-giving qualities. All right, so
I think one thing we ought
Yeah.
to add to that was that these weren't the poor women of Assisi. They,
No.
like St. Clare, she came from a very aristocratic, large landowning home, and she brought her friends with her and some of her relatives.
oh,
So they weren't poor to begin with. They were giving up the stuff that they had gone with the rest of and becoming poor.
Oh,
Much like Saint Francis himself.
Yeah, very much like Francis himself, only higher class than Francis. Francis was from a merchant class.
Right.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's a shade on the poor that that is very important to know, that so they gave up their wealth in order to become the poor women.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
And to become like Jesus, who was.
And to become like Jesus. Yeah. Yeah, I read that too, but didn't know that. Oh, well, that's great. Thank you very much. Yeah. Okay. Oh, there's so many and many. All right. Well, taking a little dido here. Let me see. I wanted to go to the question or the observation that, of course, mysticism doesn't belong only to Christians. And in fact, there's a question that we might consider at some point being, so what makes a Christian mystic as different from all the mystics in the world, of which there are millions and millions? And here we have, and you're familiar with the idea, certainly, of the whirling dervishes, which it's a sect of Muslimism, and has had a pretty tough time in history. It's not terribly old historically, maybe 200 years or so, something like that, as an outward practice. That is the whirling dervish part. But Sufism has been around for a long time, which is an aspect of and an interpretation in Muslimism, which, of course, I'm not qualified to outline for you. But the whirling dervishes, here is a thing to point out about the significance of repetitive movement. All
Mhm.
mysticism is not visual, static visual, like in paintings, or sounds and voices at all. It can be visited, I won't say induced, but visited, the spirit, the mystical spirit visited by movement, and especially repetitive movement. I was hoping to have some footage from some African and Australian, um, well, we could say tribes, who move in order to invoke the mystical state. But as you know, I'm having enough trouble just doing this, so I couldn't do that, get that worked into this too. But maybe someday when we're back in uh, in St. Francis building, I can show those. Anyway, but this is good. Here's a Sufi whirling dervish. When Diane and I were in Istanbul, I hoped maybe to be able to see some. You had to go to special places and only on Sunday, and so on and so on. But that wasn't being available at the time we were there. So I've never seen it live. But in any case, notice the whirling of the figures. You've probably seen them before, maybe on YouTube or somewhere. The right hand, the palm of the right hand is turned upward. The palm of the left hand is down. Uh, that is in order to receive the mystical power of Allah and to pass it through your body and to continue it by releasing it uh, to the world, back to the world again. And the whirling can go on for a very long time, over half an hour. It can go for 2 hours, as I understand, and so forth. This is a constricted space, so I suppose the man in the middle is kind of controlling that. Notice that they are wearing all the same kind of hat. That symbolically is the grave marker of a Sufi Muslim. They die in order to have communion with Allah's gift, with Allah's love. So this is a dying action, giving oneself over to the death uh, of the self in order to give it entirely over to Allah, um, to receive and to pass it down back into the earth, and which presumably then circles back again and so forth. So here's the idea of the circling with the ultimate power, whatever that might be, the creative power, not for earth and life. And here it is being practiced on a physiological level. This was very interesting. Some of my professors I talked with about this, they and psychologists and the likes, that the head is tilted. Let me get this off. Okay. The head is slightly tilted. Now, of course, our semicircular canals have there is in that system, you know, the labyrinthine system in the inner ear, there's a little rock, an otolith, a little rock. Well, there's a wonderful story about that, about how that came there through ancient and long time history. But that rock is displaced when the head is tilted. And that's how you know that your head's tilting, because that little otolith rolls into into a little bit different place in that tiny organ right there. And you can't directly feel it, but it's a proprioceptor. But you know that your head is tilted, and that becomes normal. So you don't get dizzy, because you are in the normal state of a person who is in the process of dying but seeing Allah. All right, now there's quite a devotion in that, of course. So next picture here, you can see a little bit closer up a dervish, uh, and they are whirling and whirling and whirling, and see his head is slightly tilted, uh, and that little otolith is displaced in the labyrinth. So there is deep devotion there, and mysticism. All right, going on to a very different culture. Here's uh, from Indonesia. This is called the Kris sword dance, Kriss. I'm not sure whether that name was attached to this by Margaret Mead or Gregory Bateson, but they did the recording, anthropological studies recording of this Indonesian ritual. You might be able to see it. Oh yes, there are a couple of people you can see. They have this long sword, which is wiggly. It's not quite serrated, but almost. And they attempt to thrust it into their chests. This goes on and on for a very long time. There is some old video footage that Bateson and Mead took when they were there, and drums going repetitively, and they whirl and whirl, and they attempt to stab themselves through, and they can't do it. So this is their ecstasy, which is a form of mysticism, of course. They're testing the power of great God's life and so forth, and extremely rarely is anybody ever pierced or even cut by this sword. It's really quite amazing to see. All right, and then right below that, in the same page from this book where I got this, is a Haitian voodoo ceremony that's in process. She is holding on to rafter beams to hold herself up, but right below her, and unfortunately it didn't get into the picture, are hot coals that are waiting for her to lower herself to, and she will walk on the coals. This is also, of course, not just self-torture. It's too easy to interpret that as the meaning. It's ecstasy within the context of this voodoo ceremony. I'm not sure which one it is. There are different names for them. When I was in the military, we came into, in our aircraft carrier, we came into Port-au-Prince and then came ashore for a while, for several hours. And most people went off to a nice restaurant. I did briefly, and then came out because I wanted to see a voodoo ceremony, which I had heard was just outside of the city. And it hadn't started, and I was let just to see into people gathering and the coals and so on. But then I was not supposed to be there any longer. So I left, of course, right away. But this is that kind of ceremony that is going on. Again, it's an ecstasy. Many of the Christian mystics, they name this extreme experience, whether it's from illness or injury, and so forth, as ecstasy. We'll talk about that more in the next class. What is the aesthetic? Well, both aesthetic and ecstatic transport. Okay, one more picture away from outside of the Christian mystics, but a mystic nonetheless. And this is a Manchurian shaman. in a state of mystic transport. Uh, I don't know whether we would call it ecstatic or not, but he is seeing the visions right now. You can tell by the set of his eyes and face and so forth. He will he will come out of that after so much time when the vision is completed and report to the people that he is a member of. We might say tribe, but whatever that community might be, what it is that he saw and interpret it, because he is the middleman between the ultimate power, God, and by whatever name, and us earthlings, and he is the interpreter of that. Of course, that's exactly the same as the peyote shamans of the Huichol Indians of Mexico, and all up and down the whole Americas are these shamans who have insights to share with their communities. I was going to put in here some Huichol images. They're yarn paintings. Diane and I got to go to deep in Mexico, a powwow some years ago, where 5 tribes who didn't have anything to do with each other and even spoke slightly or completely different languages, and they shared their experiences and how they practice their mysticisms. And there was always dancing and repetition of movement and drums and so forth with them. That was really quite an amazing, wonderful experience that we were allowed to see and participate in. Okay, any comments about the mystical experiences worldwide? It seems to be pretty far off from the Christian mystic, but there are things that are the same.
I
So
guess I have a question,
yeah,
and that
John.
is, um, obviously, when you're talking about peyote, you're talking about hallucinogenics, and
Yeah.
I'm sure a lot of us have experience with those. Um, Among the Christians, was there ergot, or were there hallucinogenics that were involved with Christians?
Well, I've never found any deliberately used in the way that it's holy, even by the Indonesian tribes, for example. They use incense and other things. And then, of course, as we've mentioned, peyote by the Huichol and other Indians of Mexico and so forth. But I never came across any deliberate use of hallucinogens by the Christian mystics. However, in the dark Middle Ages, well before Hildegard, was the period where people were poisoned by tares among the wheat.
Right,
It's
ergot.
it's an ergot. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, the wheat in wet years and wet seasons develops a black toxin in the corn, and they didn't know that was the source of it, and people literally went mad and dancing through the countryside, or what people call dance. It was really just a wild, um, uh, not not really ecstasy, but uh, really an awful thing, and almost always died from this ergot. Now that's not an intentional hallucinogen, however. After
Right.
about 4 years of that, it was somebody figured out, ooh, I think that's the bread we're eating. And so when they were taking communion bread, they were taking, yeah, the ultimate power, that's for sure, with this ergot. It isn't really funny, but maybe some of you have seen the Bergman film, what's that, honey? The last, uh, yeah, Dance of Death, where the individuals are struck uh, with the ergot and dance, over the hillside, holding hands, and literally, eventually tearing each other apart. Um, he doesn't show that in the film. He uses it allegorically. Anyway, so that's the only occasion for that. There were church responses to it that called it the evil dance of death, that they've been, you know, they've been possessed by evil spirits because their lives were evil and all of that, you know, judgment passing for these poor people that were suffering from the very bread that they were eating. But that wasn't, you know, mysticism in the sense that we're using it right now. But that's a
Right.
good question. Yeah. So anything else so far? Oh, it's a,
I was remembering the teachings of Don Juan that
oh,
Carlos Castaneda published a long time ago. There were several books,
yeah,
and Don Juan could be considered a mystic in his tradition. But
yeah,
I think later there was some information put out that Carlos Castaneda kind of made that up. But
yeah.
even so, I think peyote was involved in that ceremony that Don Juan did.
Yes.
Yes, it was.
Mhm.
Yeah, uh-huh. Yeah, yeah, right. And he was revealed as a as not really having that access to it, but still, uh, well, he made good stories out of what that was, what that process was. Yeah.
Well,
Carlos.
as far as other pagan ones, there's psilocybin in Mexico and magic mushrooms. And
Yeah,
there's all, I just, you know, a lot of other religions, the shamans use different kinds of stuff too, but
Yeah.
apparently not the Christians. So that's interesting to me.
yeah, yeah. Uh-huh. Not so far as we know, certainly not, and not intentionally, but which carries us into what I want to get to uh, toward the closer here, and that is the two appendices, attached articles I have to what I wrote up for you for this today's class on consciousness and via negativa. I know that Maureen Bike knows about a lot about via negativa. I don't think she's with us today. Anybody else heard of that before?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, sure. Harvey. Okay. Yeah. Are you in favor?
You know, I tried for a long time to read Evelyn Underhill's
Oh,
book,
yeah.
The Cloud of Unknowing.
Cloud of unknowing. Yeah. Uh, I refer to the cloud of unknowing too in the handout for the class, which is really a wonderful, amazing book. The author is unknown, but it was quite widely read in the 14th and 15th centuries. And I found a copy through some bookstore. I don't think it was Amazon, but I don't remember. And the cloud of unknowing. Let's see, I had a quote from that I was going to use. Well, maybe later. Anyway, the via negativa really developed quite early in the history of Christian mysticism. It's not really a medieval thing. It started much earlier than that, and we'll touch on that beginning some next week with who was naming it and kind of where it came from. But briefly, right now, think of it as the nothingness. There is the possibility, shall we say, that that once you arrive in God's presence, the self completely dissolves and disappears. You are not there anymore. There is no you, and all is darkness. There is no light. So, and Saint John of the Cross, and Harvey has told me that he's puzzled over that for quite a long time. I do too. He has said that darkness is God. And what can that mean? That you have, he said, and also further said that though he was lost himself, there was no self, he gained himself as, I'm not saying this quite right, but he gained his being in God. So he no longer existed, but he was merged with the original God. Science would call it the black hole, and emerged from his mystical experiences full of joy at that experience of being so completely absorbed by the original creation, not some ersatz representation of it later, that he could feel nothing but joy. That's via negativa in part. Well, yeah, that is. Now, of course, the opposite from that is not via negativa, and it's something like what Hildegard certainly went through and sought and so forth, and others that we've been talking about. So there is the positive form, and then there is this negativa form. To that, let me attach another thing that has developed in the language we might keep in mind, using in considering the mystics and mysticism. And that is in the approach, as an individual is approaching his or her mystical state, they choose to get there by one of two ways. One is apophatic, and the other is cataphatic. Those two words are in the material that I sent to you right at the end of that. Okay, the apophatic and the cataphatic. Apophatic is, well, no, let me start with cataphatic. Hildegard used imagery, sound, music, we don't know about movement, for approaching and then entering her state of her mystical state. Of course, the headaches helped a lot too, apparently. I mean, if you can think of a migraine helping, I'm sure it wasn't every time. She deliberately also many times visited her mystical state and used, we might call them aids, but they're not aids. They are part of God's creativity given to us. And that is creation, putting things together, the art of one's life, and using those as the passage to the mystical state. So that's apophatic. I mean, cataphatic. I'm sorry.
Yes.
I got that reversed. Did I get that right, Harvey? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And the other is without any such aid, shall we call it. Now, when we get to Meister Eckhart and others, that's where they are. They say that's the harder way to go there. They don't say cataphatic is wrong, but that's the easy way. But the way deeply to the most profound union with God, which you can't even name, because it isn't he or she, it isn't, there is no pronoun, there is nothing that you can say that names God, then is without any aid, even imagery in your own head. We all know that right now it's kind of popular in meditation practices to see a flame and concentrate on the flame and so forth. All right, well and good. But to go completely without any such aid, to enter the darkness, and it overcomes you. You can't voluntarily say, okay, go dark, everything. You can practice. In fact, you have to practice, and Meister Eckhart tells us that. You've got to practice a long time in order to enter the nothingness, the darkness, the dark night of the soul, it has been called. But, and that's of course St. John of the Cross, but We interpret that, tend to interpret it now as depression. Oh dear, the dark night of the soul, you go into deep depression and so on. But from his writings, that isn't what's intended. It's the darkness of God, of the original creation, when all is one. Everything is one. There is no separation of the elements. And you enter that oneness. So there's that definition in complete, the definition of one, the one. And the apophatic approach is through nothing. So there are the two approaches, and we'll be looking at that, watching for it in the various mystics as we go along in that. Okay. All right. Anybody got anything to add or subtract, for that matter? I'm new at this too, you know. I've only been working on it for 2 years since Ed Lee told me I had to do it.
Told you you had to, huh?
Told you, told
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, he did. Yeah. Huh.
Yeah, well, John, I've been looking online, and from what I heard in St. Francis earlier and online, they say that St. Clare and St. Francis were brother and sister.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah.
I've read that too. I don't know if that's been
That-
authenticated. Yeah.
No, that's not true. They were not related. They were brother and sister in terms of having the same kind of movement, and but they weren't a part of even the same order. Ultimately, I mean, you know, you couldn't have an order for women and an order for men joined up, but they weren't related at all. They came from two different classes of people, as I said earlier. That he came from a mercantile class, and she came from an old aristocratic family that had a lot of ownings. And one of the problems with St. Clare was that when she shaved her head, had St. Francis shave her head, that meant that she went out of the marriage market. And that was a big deal because women were used as the tool to form alliances between powerful families.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Okay. Well, that's good to know.
And
Thanks.
there's no evidence at all that they, you know, real evidence. You see these things on movies or something, but there was no evidence that they ever had any romantic kind of relationship.
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
didn't say romantic, I said brother and sister.
No, I mean, but I was just adding that. Yeah, no,
Yeah.
they weren't brother and sister. They came from different classes, and
Mhm. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I hadn't come across anything that indicated they were really blood brother and sister at all either. So,
yeah.
okay. Yeah. Ed, have you got something you want to add?
John?
I'm going
Yeah.
to read a passage experience from a guy that heard about 20 years ago. Jerry Renard is his name.
Get closer to the mic, Ed.
I can't.
Oh.
As usual, my wife is blocking my way.
I brought it right up.
Okay.
Can't get out.
All right. Now give it a whirl.
Then one night, something happened that was quite unlike anything else I had experienced. I was sitting alone, reading a magazine in a chair, when I was suddenly overcome by an overwhelming sense of awareness. The universe momentarily disappeared, and I just sat there alone in a stupor of awe. I felt totally safe and completely taken care of within the knowledge of a presence capitalized that until that moment would have been unimaginable. Although the experience of revelation can never be translated into words, there is one quality of it that is so unique, it clings to the memory. It happens in an instant when one is given an experience of being outside time and space,
Uh-huh.
and even beyond that. you become one with something so big it's beyond size.
Hmm.
The clearest quality of it is that it's completely like anything of this universe, is that it's constant. There's no change or interruption in its limitless power. It doesn't shift or waver. It gives you a taste of something that can be relied upon, something real, the joy of which is beyond belief. I knew then that I had been communicated to by God.
There we are. Yeah. Well, that sounds very much like John of the Cross. Yeah.
Or Hildegard.
John, I have a question, I guess,
John?
for the group.
Is this John again, or is this James?
Well,
Who's
that was John Everhart, but somebody else was talking, so I
Oh.
apologize.
James, was it you? You wanted to say something, I think. No?
No.
Well, all right, be
Oh.
that way.
Well, my question, John, was
This is
Ed-
Michael.
Ed had a mystic experience. I'm just wondering if we could have a show of hands of people that have had similar experiences. You know some of my background, so
Yeah.
I'm just curious.
Yeah,
Has anybody else experienced what Ed experienced?
I'm
Or
scanning.
Not my experience.
Oh, Pat Fox has, and
James?
James, and yeah, okay,
Because it does change you.
yeah.
It does.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
I'd like to offer, maybe I do have something to say, John. You know, the last part that you were talking about in terms of the oneness and the darkness, you know, I've experienced all three of what you described in terms of mysticism. You know, I've had near death, I've had extreme illness. I forget what the third one that you were described as a qualification to become a mystic. But I've had all three of those, and from an early age as well. And so when I heard you describe the last part of what you were talking about, for me, when I've experienced that darkness that you talk about in terms of being in communion with God, when I've experienced that darkness, for me, that's what living is.
Uh-huh.
That's truly what living is. It's not having to do anything but be in that place and just be in the oneness of it all. And sometimes in that space, when I'm in that space, the most wonderful things that I can share with people, and oftentimes I do. I've got messages to share for people or groups or organizations, and that's when I receive things. And oftentimes I'll come out of that space, and that's exactly what I do. And I truly have that joy that you talk about, and it's something that I can't, words don't describe.
Yeah, yeah. Well, hallelujah. James, I'm very moved and touched by that.
John?
Yes.
John, this
Is
is
that
Michael.
Michael, yeah, I knew you wanted.
Have you time?
Yeah.
Yes, yes. Yes, I wanted to say that it seems to me that the womb experience that we don't recall. However, so much of what we've been speaking about in the mystical experience, whether it's union with another, whether it's being taken care of, whether it's a sense of rhythm in some of these ecstatic dances with the beating of the heart, it seems to me that all human beings have at this early point in their development, they have been in touch with their connectedness to their creator. in a sense, in that case of ourselves, and bodily sense, our mothers. We are inside this womb. It's a dark place. It's a watery place. And this sense of union, of belonging and being protected and being completely surrounded by care seems to be associated, I think, with our earliest, call it a pre-memory that we have. So I'm wondering what connection there may be between that womb experience that we have and this later effort to return to that experience that we had known in our very early lives.
Yeah, yeah. A wonderful thing to think about, Michael. Thank you so much. I actually came across one comment by a current mystic saying this is exactly, you are born again. The real meaning of that, not just that you went to church and got dipped, but to really pass into the nothingness that is God, because it's everything and the origin, and to reemerge. You are born again in that. That was one comment, and it touches on what you're talking about, I think. Thanks very much, Michael. Nice to see you too. My goodness, it's been so long. Darn it. Well, our time is up, but is there any other that, yeah, okay.
I'd like to point out something that maybe everybody's experienced, that they've had a whiff of this.
Yeah.
As I understand it, the defining characteristic is that a sense of oneness is that you're no longer conscious of you as a subject observing something other than you.
Uh-huh.
And if anybody's had an experience similar to, say, looking at a sunset and just being part of it.
Yeah.
And then a few seconds later, you're conscious, oh, look at that sunset. It's now you looking at instead of part. That's the distinction between a separation by subject and object and merging.
Yeah, exactly. That the addendum on consciousness is a discussion that approaches that you've brought up there. So might read that again too.
Well, what about discorporation? Have the mystics, I'm sure that they have felt themselves, and anybody that's had a near-death experience probably, has separated from their body, and it's kind of, I don't know how you get back. You just do, but or we are, but I have the Christian. I'm stuttering. I'm sorry. Have the Christian mystics talked about that, about separating from their body, from being able to see themselves?
Oh, many, yes, many do. That they are no more, and they separate. That's the closest I've ever come personally to what I think is a mystical experience, but I call it bliss. And it only happened to maybe 3 or 4 times in my life, and rather briefly. But anyway, yes, there are several mystics that for whom this happens virtually regularly, and they cultivate it and pursue that to move there. Well, good. Thank you all very much, and thanks for your patience and my ineptitudes at the Zoom.
Well, thank you.
Well, yeah, you bet. It's great to see you all, and thanks very much for your commentaries. All right, the next class material is coming up, so watch your emails.
Thank you, John.
Yes, thank you.
John,
bye-bye.
Yeah.
So much with what you've done.
Oh, yeah, well, you started it all. I have to tell everybody, because I told him he's a mystic one time, and he said, "Oh, tell me about it." All right. Well, dinner calls. So
Let me ask you one question before you leave.
Pardon me?
Can I ask you one question before you leave?
Sure.
How did you think that went compared to last week?
Oh,
Technology wise,
I'm no good at it still.
but I think it went better. Don't you feel like?
Well, I covered almost everything I have on my sheet that says be sure to cover. And the class participated, and I really appreciate that.
Yeah. So
Yeah, that's good.
it looked like the one error that we had is that what you want to do is start your PowerPoint ahead of time,
Okay,
then come into Zoom so that when you click the share button,
yeah,
PowerPoint is already there.
It's
That's
already
like
there.
the only real mistake,
all right.
not mistake, that just the miscue that we had.
Yeah, it's a mistake. Just go ahead and say it. I believe in science and the real.
So, I mean, that's a pretty easy fix. Just start your PowerPoint ahead of time.
Yeah, okay. Start PP early.
Yeah.
Yep.
First.
I call him and give him the other.
Yep, and then come into Zoom and away we go.
And then away we go to Zoom. Okay, I got it. Thank you so much, Jim, and thanks so much for your help. I know this is not.
Because of the stuff at the start, I forgot to start the recording until about 15-20 minutes in. So we missed the first 15 to 20 minutes.
Oh no.
So you're just gonna have to do that over again.
All
Thank you, Jim.
All right, take care. Thank you.
Right. Thank you all very much. Hey, James, great to see you.
Bye-bye.
Everybody. Pat.